Hey everyone, so I'm going to go over this intervals problem on LeetCode. I'm just going to read it first so I can get an understanding of what it's asking. So we're given an array of intervals where intervals at index I equals the start of I and end of I. We're going to merge all overlapping intervals and return an array of the non-overlapping intervals that cover all the intervals in the input. Okay, so we're given an example input right here. So these are the intervals, and the output is after they're merged. So you can see that we have 1, 6, so that would be due to 1, 3 and 2, 6. Since 2 is less than 3, you can just combine them. And then 8, 10, that's separate because it does not overlap with 15 and 18. It's both these values are less than. So we're just given these three. We also have this one. These overlap because these are the same integer. So it fits, they go over each other. So I'm just gonna copy this problem into my code editor. Okay, and let's just make this a little bit clear. Okay. So my first step is going to be understanding. So we'll start with the input. The input is just going to be a 2D list containing sublists of intervals. And the output is going to be also a 2D list containing the merged intervals. Okay, so let's start with an example, just so we can demonstrate that we understand. So let's say, for example, we have 1, 3, 2, 6, and 8, 10. Okay, if we were given these sets of intervals, we could say that the first two are going to overlap since 3 is higher than 2. So we can just combine it with and just have the start and then the end. So 1, 6. And since 6 is less than 8, there's no overlap here. So we're just left with 8 and 10. Okay, so I think I have a pretty good understanding of this problem. I guess one of the questions I would ask the interviewer is whether the intervals we're given are sorted or not. So I'm going to assume that they are sorted for now, but it would be a good idea to ask. Now we're going to move to the matching step. So I haven't seen a problem like this before, but I imagine we're going to be using, well, we are going to be using lists and merging these lists. We're also probably going to need a for loop for this, as well as conditionals. Okay, so that's what I have so far for MASH. Let's move on to plan. So I think I'm going to, instead of modifying the input in place, I'm going to create a separate array to hold the output for the merge intervals. So create a variable, hold the merged intervals. I'm going to create a variable to track the current interval that we're looking at. And then we're gonna through the loop through the rest of the array. And then we're gonna check if, so what we're doing here is we're checking, if we were to simplify this, A, B, C, D. Basically what we do is we're checking if the start of whatever the next array is less than the end of the current one. If it is, then we can set the end as the new end of the current array. Otherwise, we don't change the array if there's no overlap. We just keep it the same. So we're going to check if the start of the next array is less than, can also be equal, so less than or equal to the current array's end. If it is, we're going to set the end of the next array, or sorry, set the end of the current array to the integer of the next array's end. Else, we're just going to add the current array to the output. And we're going to be looping through this, so we're going to set the current array variable to the next array. So essentially, we're going to go through each one of these, so it's going to shift each time. Okay, and now I'm going to write a little bit of pseudocode for this. So it's going to look something like function merged intervals, and it's going to take in a list of intervals. And we're going to have the output, so I'm just going to call this merged. This is going to be set to an empty array. And then we're also going to need current array start and end. And these are just going to be integers for the values. Next, we're going to loop. So it's going to be a for loop, a loop in the range. We're going to start with the next one. So loop starting at next array until the end of the input. Okay. And then I think we're gonna have to keep track also. So we're gonna create variables for the next array also. So we're gonna have next array start and end. And that's going to be indexed. So we're going to use the actual iterator to determine what the next array is. So Just gonna set that to I values. Next, we're gonna check, whoops, if the next array start is less than or equal to current array end. And if it is, we're going to set the current array, set current array end to the max. So this is just gonna, we're probably gonna use a Python built-in function to determine the max if it's less than or equal what it would be. So max between the current arrays end and the next arrays end. Okay, and then in the case that is not less than or equal to the current array end, we're just going to add to output the current array. And we're going to set the current array to the next array. Okay. So I think that should cover everything. So I'm just going to go ahead and move to the implementation step. So I am going to copy this. Actually, I can just leave it there and I'll go in between. I'll look at it above. So we're going to have a function called merged intervals. And we'll just call the input list intervals. Okay. And we're going to need to store this output in an array. So merged equals empty array. And then we're going to need to store the current array start and end. So what we can do is actually do this right here. So what this will do is it'll actually grab the first interval, and then when we separate them like this will be equal to essentially 0, 0, and this will be 0, 1. So we'll get them both separately. Next, we're gonna create our loop. So for I in range, and we're starting at the next array, so we're gonna need to start at 1. And then let's just do the length of the intervals. Okay. And then we can do the same thing. So we can do next, start, next, end equals to intervals 1. Okay. Now we can check if the next start is less than or equal to the current end. Then we're going to set the current end to the max. So max between the current end and the next. And so that's basically going to check what could happen is that, let's say we had two, let's say this was 1 and 4 and 2 and 3. This would actually go inside of this one. So that's why we want to check the next end if it's whatever the max is. Okay, so I think that'll work, and then else, let's just append the array if there's no overlap. So current start. This actually has to be an array, a list. So current start, current end. And then we're going to set the current start and current end to the next one so we can continue. So current start, current end is going to be equal to the next start and the next end. And finally, we are going to actually have to notice an error I made. We have to set this to I. Finally, we are gonna return our merged. Okay. So that's the implementation. Let me just test it really quick. So merge intervals, and let's try it with our example. So let me actually change this to 1, 3 and 2, 6. Just gonna copy and paste this. Okay, and let me run this and see what happens. Okay, so we can see that it worked. These two merge since this one is bigger, and then the 8 and the 10 remained since there is no overlap. Okay, so this was my implementation, and eventually we would get to the review and evaluate step.